Space, the vast emptiness, the great unknown. Soon, it may also be the celestial battlefield. Through the 1960s, the United States was locked in direct confrontation with communism, the war in Vietnam, and the race to space against the Soviet Union. Today, the United States is once more engaged in a race, with a far-off communist nation and higher stakes. On November 18th, General John Raymond gave that remark at the Center for Strategies and International Studies. The remark came from the growing threat of countries adversarial towards the United States. Some of these nations are advancing military and warfighting objectives in space. Raymond said, "Space is a warfighting domain, just like air, land, and sea." One country joining that domain is China. A 2019 report titled Challenges to Security in Space by the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency detailed the potential Chinese threat. The Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, has dedicated significant resources to growing all aspects of its space program, from improving military space applications to developing human spaceflight and lunar exploration programs. This includes developing weaponry. Inside China, there are 4 space launch sites and 2 satellite control centers. According to data from the Union of Concerned Scientists, as of March 2019, China has 299 satellites in orbit around the Earth. Most are government-operated satellites, followed by military satellites. China's satellites are primarily Earth observation satellites. The DIA report classifies these as intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, or ISR satellites. There are other types of satellites, like missile warning and position, navigation, and timing satellites, or PNT. These satellites orbit the Earth at different distances. The closest is low Earth orbit, up to 1,200 miles from Earth's surface. Next out is medium Earth orbit. Then, there are geosynchronous orbit satellites, which orbit at the same speed that Earth rotates. Lastly, there are highly elliptical orbit satellites. Generally, the closer to Earth, the more satellites. They provide different functions based on their distance. China accounts for 14.5% of active satellites orbiting the Earth. By contrast, the United States has 43.7% of all active satellites. The vast majority of these satellites are commercial satellites. Many are ISR satellites, with communication satellites as well. Joseph McGuire, the acting director of national intelligence, described how China intends to counter those satellites.
China has deployed a ground-based missile intended to target and destroy satellites in low Earth orbit. China is pursuing weapons capable of destroying satellites up to geosynchronous Earth orbit.
McGuire said China has already established their own dedicated space force.
The threat to U.S. and allied space systems continues to grow unabated.
The DIA report describes the Chinese military tactic as the ability to control the information sphere and denying adversaries the same. The DIA outlined ways to interfere with, disable, or destroy satellites, known as counterspace concepts. Interference or disabling may come as electronic warfare, such as hacking or blocking transmissions. One example is jamming communications. Satellites can also be outright destroyed. One way is with missiles or rockets. Another is with high-powered lasers. According to a United States-China Economic and Security Review Commission report, China intends to surpass other spacefaring countries in terms of space-related industry, technology, diplomacy, and military power. Namrata Goswami, an independent analyst and author specializing in space policy, said China now possesses a direct threat to the United States' space presence. She highlighted a weapons test. China first tested an anti-satellite weapon, or ASAT, in January 2007, destroying one of its own weather satellites. In comparison, the United States tested its first ASAT in 1985. Goswami said that after a successful ASAT test, China now possesses the capacity to hold U.S. space assets, especially military assets, vulnerable. This is all with the goal of turning itself into the dominating space power by 2045. Goswami also said that the U.S. depends on space for its critical infrastructure. It possesses grave national security risks if a country threatens those assets. She said that establishing a dedicated space force is in the interest of the United States, and that is exactly what the United States has done. President Donald Trump directed the Department of Defense and the Pentagon to begin the process of creating the Space Force in 2018. Trump established the United States Space Command in August 2019. General Raymond is the commander of the U.S. Space Comm. These are the first steps in establishing the United States Space Force, which would be the sixth independent branch of the U.S. military. Raymond said, "We're building a fighting force to respond to the competitive, congested, and contested strategic environment that we face today." Some of the U.S. Spacecomm's objectives are launching satellites, providing communications, intelligence, missile warnings, navigation services, and counterspace operations. The general said the goal of the command is to deter any conflict from beginning or extending into space. The U.S. Spacecomm is already carrying out day-to-day operations. Raymond said they will develop joint warfighting suitable for space. The campaign plan is expected to be completed in 2020. His remarks came 2 days ahead of NATO declaring space to be an operational domain. Space is now recognized as a potential domain of conflict, meaning that NATO allies can now request defensive support from other nations, such as sharing satellite time. Information, or the lack of it, is power, said John Boyd, principal of the Boyd Company. He emphasized the importance of American satellites. He said, GPS satellite systems critical to our national defense, along with maintaining and advancing virtually all segments of our consumer economy, are housed in space. Boyd's firm provides location and management counsel and has been active in the aerospace industry. His company's clients include Boeing, Pratt & Whitney, Safran Landing Gear, and the Aerospace Industries Association. Along with protecting the United States, the development of the U.S. Spacecomm will help the U.S. economy. Boyd said one of the most coveted economic development projects in recent times is the yet-to-be-chosen location of the new U.S. Space Force. The location will emerge as a hub for space industry suppliers and manufacturers. Boyd likened the future space hub to previous major projects, like building the internet backbone or the interstate highway system. The CCP's goal is to replace the United States not just on Earth, but now beyond. China, along with other adversarial nations like Russia, Iran, and North Korea, will continue to advance their capabilities in space. The second space race is on, and the United States is rising to the challenge.